Got it. Okay, great. All right, I'm gonna go back to the start. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing for a minute just to say hi and welcome and thank you so much. Thank you to everyone for waiting as we bared with us. So we are really pleased to be able to have this webinar tonight and to discuss something so important and so close to all of our ovaries, and that is the subject of egg freezing. We are really lucky to have Dr. Lorraine with us, who qualified from the University of St. Andrews in 2010 with a BSc in medical sciences and continued her clinical training at the University of Manchester. She's a specialist in obstetrics and gynecology with an interest in reproductive medicine. She's undertaking her PhD at the moment and is affiliated with University College London. So her research interests include fertility sparing surgery and the use of intraoperative ultrasound and elective oocyte cryopreservation. And Dr. Lorraine has been working with us at Hertility for quite a while now, and it's been amazing to be able to just work with like-minded people. So often you work with people who are, who have experience, and then they have also personal experience as well. For anyone who doesn't know me, my name is Dr. Helen O'Neill, and I am the CEO and founder of Hertility Health. I'm also a lecturer in reproductive and molecular genetics at University College London, where I've been lecturing for the last 8 years. Prior to that, I did a Master's of Science in Prenatal Genetics and Fetal Medicine and a PhD looking at the formation of the ovaries and the specific genetic signals that lead to a formation of an ovary and healthy eggs. So our combined interest is definitely a mutual territory for us both. And tonight's webinar has probably had the highest number of people sign up to it. And it just goes to show that egg freezing has become a topic that's almost common vernacular. And when you think about the technology that is involved in egg freezing, actually that's quite amazing that it's actually quite commonplace. When I started lecturing at UCL, it was actually relatively new in that while the technology had been around, people weren't really talking about it in the normal social realms of conversation. Now it's almost an expectation. And so we wanted to firstly talk about what it is. Secondly, try and answer the question. Nobody can answer anything for it, but lend some experience, lend some research and then some insights into what egg freezing is. Dr. Lorraine and her team published an incredible paper this year, and we at Hertility only like to talk about peer-reviewed, scientifically credible, valid studies. And so really, rather than just continuing down the rhetoric that people do when they're talking about trends and phases and scientific approaches, we really want to be always scientifically valid. And I think that's probably testament to what we've built at Hertility. So we're going to just do an introduction to egg freezing, bringing with it just our personal experience and our personal selves. And then we're going to bombard Lorraine with lots of questions, not too many, about just the practice itself. So to begin with, I just wanted to start by the reason we actually started by calling this webinar, Should I Freeze My Eggs, is because it's a question that lived in our heads, and it's a question that we get asked so much at Hertility. To put it into context and why we feel so strongly about this, we started Hertility almost maybe 3 years ago, and this question was front and center in my mind. When I say I lectured about reproduction, infertility, fertility, women's health, so often I was presenting the facts around fertility and infertility. And so this question was something that lingered in my head for a very long time. And I think the biggest thing that we should be talking about when it comes to fertility preservation is age. And this graph is a graph that actually haunted me so much in my many years doing reproductive medicine and reproductive science and women's health, because unfortunately this graph is a graph that depicts our ovarian reserve. And it's a depressing graph that essentially tells us that we are born with all the eggs that we'll ever have. So when we're born with about 1 or 2 million eggs, and this radically reduces over time. So by the time we actually hit 30, if you look at 30 here, it seems to have a pretty sad amount of eggs left over. And the aim of this webinar is actually to educate. It's not to freak anyone out and not to depress anyone. But the problem is we're actually surrounded by lies when it comes to our fertility. And we are surrounded by media that portrays images of women having children in their 40s, even in their 50s, of celebrities having children much later in life. And what this does is it actually paints a very unfair picture about what fertility is. So at around 30 years old, about 86% of our egg reserve has gone. And that sounds really depressing. And obviously this is different for every individual, but we actually need to understand this a little bit better, because when we so flippantly talk about ovarian reserve, what we're looking at here is a general statistic. There are people who can conceive at 40. There are people who can't conceive in their 20s. And so what we are really all about is educating people as to the individual determinants about their own fertility. Everyone will always hear these stories about my mom had me at 45, or my mom went into early menopause. And sometimes we rely on those stories to say, well, it's fine, I should be okay. But our mothers are a very different generation to our generation. In terms of their exposures, their lifestyle, in terms of their habits, in terms of their consumption. And so when we have this idea about our eggs, we tend to think that we only lose 1 egg per cycle. So how could we possibly go from 2 million eggs at birth to so few in our 30s? But the reality is every menstrual cycle, we lose about 1,000 eggs. So there's a high attrition rate in the number of eggs that we have in each of our ovaries. And actually, throughout our lives, we only ever really mature about 400 eggs during our lifetime, which seems a lot. But when you think of the context of being born with millions of eggs, it seems a bit weird that we would only ever actually be able to mature 400 eggs during that process. And what I want to talk about is an ovarian reserve marker that we measure at Hertility alongside other hormones. And people often talk about AMH, and people often approach us and they say, will you just test my AMH? And we never just test AMH on its own. And while AMH is a very powerful marker of somebody's ovarian reserve, because each of the individual follicles or would-be eggs in each of our ovaries is secreting anti-Müllerian hormone. So we can actually get a really good proxy of somebody's fertility by measuring AMH in the bloodstream. It is not the only determinant of fertility. And that's something that we have to caveat every test with. We've spent the last few years building Hertility and building a test that took into account your menstrual cycle, your menstrual patterns, how you bleed, your symptoms, your biometrics, your lifestyle factors, your and nutritional consumption, all of the things that actually could be any previous infection. All of those things are the key determinants of somebody's fertility. AMH is just one marker of fertility, but it's actually very unfortunate that we tell women the only way of testing your fertility is by actively trying to conceive. Now, when I was told this really annoyed me, because I was like, seems like a pretty big move to take to test whether I'm fertile or not. And believe me when I say I was consumed with fertility. The idea that my fertility was rapidly dropping and I had no control over it was what led me to start Hertility. Led me to actually say, hang on a minute, I don't want to have to go to a fertility clinic and spend a lot of money that I didn't have. When I was single, 31, 32, 33, still didn't feel like I was in the place to actually go to a fertility clinic and check my fertility. That felt like something I almost needed to make a big decision about. Was I ready to even freeze my eggs? And the reason I wanted to create something that enabled us to actually have a bit of a window into our fertility is because I knew we actually could do that. I wanted to take every test that they do at a fertility clinic and every question that they ask you at a fertility clinic, and actually then include the questions they don't ask you at a fertility clinic, and combine it into a test that you could do at home. So we know that AMH is an incredibly powerful marker of our ovarian reserve, and really high levels can indicate high fertility. Really high levels can also indicate, because of the multiple follicles that you may have, it might indicate that you have polycystic ovaries or polycystic ovary syndrome. And then low AMH can actually give you a really good insight into your ovarian reserve, or whether or not you've gone into premature ovarian insufficiency. And so actually that your fertility has a lower rate than average for your age. So we can test AMH on every day of the cycle, but if you get a fertility test, we'll usually tend to tell you to test on day 3 if you're not on hormonal contraception. And that's because we test all sorts of other hormones during that, throughout the test. So again, this graph is clearly matching that graph of the egg reserve. And so that's why we know that our AMH levels will actually start to change during our 20s and 30s, and there's a slight fluctuation throughout the months. And we've been running an internal clinical trial where we test ourselves every single month to see what that fluctuation of our AMH is. And then also to monitor over time what our each individual rate of ovarian reserve decline is. And this is, I think, something that we need to start talking about and building into narrative, is around not just the only option being egg freezing, but actually understanding what your fertility is at for you. And that's why I want to talk about statistics a little bit. So when we talk about proactive hormone testing, the reason we bother and the reason we care so much is that if you just look at one element of your life, and that's your age, and you say, if I am this age and 86% of my egg reserve is gone, what's the point? Well, actually, it might be that you're not within that classic bell curve of the statistics, where we love to say, assume that everybody falls within the statistical margins, and we say everyone fits within the middle. There are always huge outliers. And so there are people, like, as I mentioned, who are much younger, who have lower fertility, or who are much older and have higher fertility. So understanding what your ovarian reserve is really key to understanding what your options are. And Hertility is all about giving people options, because we genuinely believe knowledge is power. We've had so many people who have changed their views and changed their plans based around what their results were. And this is quite a profound thing, actually. We've had people who have said, right, I just need to crack on and have a baby. We've also had people who have said, I want to have a baby. I don't have much time, and I'm going to get a donor, and I'm going to go through this journey on my own. And I cannot support that enough. It may seem lonely, but there are so many people that can support individuals along those journeys. We also know that when you test, it helps you to understand where you're at, but also it helps you understand what underlying health conditions might be affecting your fertility. And those are the things that we can signpost throughout the journey. What are the things that could be leading to a reduced fertility in any individual? And I honestly think that this is the most important thing anyone should do, is an investigation into their own hormones. So of the thousands and thousands of women that have tested their hormones with Hertility, 67% of them have at least one out of range hormone. And that really just goes to show that we're actually walking around with a bit of a hormonal mess. And there's lots of reasons for that. We're sometimes over-exercising, sometimes under-exercising. We're definitely working too hard. We're stressed. All of these things tie into our overall hormonal health. And our bodies are quite receptive to the external stimuli. And what's really strange is that throughout any day, we probably receive at least 1,000 notifications throughout the day, whether it's a message, a text, a WhatsApp, a Slack, an email, a call, random notifications from different apps. We receive thousands of notifications, and we respond to more of those notifications than we do the signals our bodies give us. Given the high rate of individuals that have gone through the fertility journey, and I'm really proud to say that over 100,000 women have done our virtual health assessment. And this gives us incredible insights into just general trends of women of our age, of women from early 20s to late 30s to early 40s. And what are the things that we're all doing? We ask questions about lifestyle. We ask questions about symptoms. And what strikes me is that we ask at the very beginning, what brings you here? Are you trying to conceive? Are you just curious about your reproductive health? Are you planning for the future, i.e. egg freezing? Or are you just experiencing symptoms? And when somebody says they're experiencing symptoms, they're experiencing what they will usually select from our menu of symptoms, about 7 symptoms. It's a lot of symptoms for somebody to actually have before they say, I'm actually experiencing some symptoms. But those who say they're just curious about their reproductive health still have on average 4 to 5 symptoms, showing you just how many of us internally mute the notifications that our body is giving us, but also how little recognition we give to the ongoing things that could be indicating that something's wrong. And a huge number of individuals are on hormonal contraception. And so those warning signs and those indicators that our menstrual cycle can give us to let us know that something might not be right or that we may be experiencing difficulty, we mute those too by being on hormonal contraception. So I think it's actually really important that we've had a whole generation of women mute their reproductive cycles, and that we start to move towards women who understand their reproductive cycles and understand their fertility, their hormones, their reproductive health. So you're here to hear about egg freezing, and that is what we will talk about. And egg freezing, a short guide to egg freezing here, and we're going to keep this brief so that we can actually leave lots of room for questions with all of you. Egg freezing is used essentially as a tool to preserve your fertility potential. It's a technology that's been around for quite a long time, but that technology has changed in its ability over time. In other words, the techniques that we use to freeze eggs or oocytes have improved over time. In fact, we go through the process of egg freezing through a number of steps. But firstly, it was only actually originally brought about for individuals who were going to be undergoing chemo or radiation therapy. And so this was a technique that was developed in order to help women preserve their fertility prior to undergoing what's called gonadotoxic treatment. It's expensive. That's one of the things you need to know. Egg freezing can cost up to £8,000, and that's what we want to be really honest about in tonight's webinar. We hope that we can move towards a much more affordable way of understanding your fertility and preserving your fertility and monitoring your fertility. But we want to be really upfront about egg freezing, the costs and the prices. Egg freezing is both a cost to you financially, psychologically, and physiologically. And that's something I don't think we talk about enough. So while most egg freezing clinics or fertility clinics will advertise the cost of egg freezing to be in and around £4,000, maybe £5,000, what they haven't included is the fact that you still need to do something with those eggs afterwards. If you come back to get them, they'll still need to be thawed, fertilized, grown, transferred for a pregnancy. And you also have to pay annual storage. So when you freeze your eggs, they have to be stored in liquid nitrogen. And so this is another important factor to bring into account when you're thinking about egg freezing. Also, the fact that we talk about egg freezing as if it guarantees you a child in the future. It doesn't. Egg freezing gives you autonomy and gives you a chance to take control of your reproductive health and your fertility. But they say that you require on average 8 or 15 eggs in order to guarantee you that one will be successfully fertilized and transferred and lead to a live birth. We are still not at the stage where women recognize that they need to freeze their eggs on time. And I get it. This is because it's expensive. By the time we can actually afford to freeze eggs, we are in our late 30s. But I do think that there are ways that we can start to build this narrative into conversation earlier so that people can maybe start saving a little bit earlier. Saving by the time you're 30. We did some maths where we said that if you put £20 away a day, I think you'd save up for it in 6 months. I need to check the maths, right? I should have done that before the webinar. But I actually reverse engineered this and thought, okay, in a post-pandemic world, if we're not getting the tube into work every day, if we're not therefore paying for the tube, buying our lunch, maybe buying those coffees, yes, it would be hard, certainly in today's world, but not impossible to save up the £4,000 to freeze your eggs. But unfortunately, the average age that women are still freezing their eggs is around 38 or 39 years old, which is 8 years older than the national age for natural pregnancy. So let's talk about the facts of egg freezing. So it's a great option for people who want to preserve their healthy eggs and use them later in life. When eggs are frozen, we actually stop the aging process. We genuinely do pause that process of aging. And so but the most important thing to remember about freezing eggs is that it is better to freeze them younger, and it's better to freeze therefore good quality eggs. The older we get, the lower the quality of our eggs. And this is for not obvious reasons. I guess if you equate your eggs to your skin, our skin becomes less elastic as we get older. We start to get a few wrinkles. We're born with our skin. We're born with all our eggs as well. And so when you think about all of the things we put our bodies through, our eggs are going through those things too. And our eggs are exposed to some of those damaging elements as well. And sometimes when the egg is supposed to, when the sperm meets the egg and it's supposed to divide evenly, that process of division prior to and after can actually mean that you get a wrong number of chromosomes. And that's why you get an increased risk of having chromosomal abnormalities the older you get. So using eggs frozen at a younger age, under 35, earlier if possible, does lead to much higher success of conceiving. But Lorraine is going to give us all of the statistics around that. So we wanted to have, I guess, a warts and all conversation about egg freezing, because so many people talk about whether you should do it. And it's become, to me, almost a burden on women, whereby how many more things can we be told we have to do? Now we're supposed to have an education, a career, make babies, meditate, do yoga, be fit, don't drink, be healthy, drink your kale smoothie. There's so many things that I get stressed out about all the things that I'm supposed to do. It's like, well, don't forget to meditate. I don't have time to meditate. I've got too many things. Maybe I should be meditating. And then you give it a chance and you think to yourself, I'm failing at this because I'm clearly not meditating. All I'm thinking of is my to-do list. And when we add in yet another societal to-do list to women, which is maybe you should think about freezing your eggs. And actually, maybe what we should think about doing is opening up conversations much earlier and stop leaving so much pressure on women to do so much at the same time. So what we are doing at Hertility is part of a movement that hopefully enables conversation. So I just want to talk about the egg freezing pathway itself. Initially, you'll have a consult. If you were to go traditional fertility clinic route, you would have a consultation and they would test your bloods. Then you decide whether egg freezing was right for you. That initial part is really expensive. It can cost over £1,000 just for that initial consultation and fertility test, which is why at Hertility we built the test from home with all of the different factors, tailoring the test, taking into account 54,000 variables for your report, and that's £149. So when people say to us, fertility is expensive, yes, it might be compared to nothing, but compared to everything else that's out there, we've actually really strived to make this as equitable and affordable to as many people as possible. Because I, for one, was somebody who couldn't afford egg freezing. And so for me, creating something that enabled me to know where I was at and monitor my fertility and make my decisions as a result of that was something that I felt really strongly about. So making the decision that if egg freezing is right for you, I think is a really important discussion that you need to have. And I think firstly, understanding where you're at is really key to that decision. I know I'm bringing it back to me, but sometimes otherwise it seems like you're lecturing and telling somebody what to do. And all I can speak of is my own experience and the experiences of the many, many women that I've spoken to. Some have felt very liberated by receiving results to a test that tells them that actually they have pretty high ovarian reserve. Others have felt like they need to do something immediately because they know their life trajectory. They know what's happening in front of them. And it was in ways liberating because they felt like, right, I have the answer. I've got to do something about this now. It's now or never. And it's quite profound chat to tell yourself, right, I need to do something. But it also lives in the back of our heads so much, this idea of our fertility, this idea that it plays into every relationship that we have, the idea that you can't just have a relaxed date with somebody without wondering, could they be a dad? Do I like you enough to have a baby with you? And that's such an unfair thing for us to carry around with us, that we have to merit a relationship based on whether or not you want to have children. And you can't enjoy that initial phases in your 30s. You can't enjoy the initial phases like, can we be footloose and fancy free, or can we have a conversation about this? And I think more and more people need to be, men also need to be mature and say, like, this is a conversation we should have early on. Okay, so cycle preparation will involve taking a number of drugs, same with the ovarian stimulation. What generally is happening in this phase, and I think it's really important to prepare your body when you're going through this, prepare your body as if you are preparing for a pregnancy. no different. You should give that eggs and those eggs the best possible chance. You should take your prenatals. You should stop drinking completely, especially if you're going through ovarian stimulation, cut it out. You should start eating much healthier. We know, for example, with alcohol, when people say, oh, maybe I should, one glass of wine is okay, but we know that actually drinking during different times of your menstrual cycle can have a different effect on your ability to conceive in that given month. Drinking during your follicular phase, which is when all those eggs are maturing prior to ovulation, actually significantly impacts your ability to conceive in that cycle. So you're not thinking about conceiving if you're freezing your eggs, but you are thinking about the health of those eggs. So putting that in your head to say, actually, all of the things that I do in the months leading up to egg freezing are things that could impact the health of my eggs. So then the ovarian stimulation process is essentially trying to amplify what is ordinarily happening in your body. So during any menstrual cycle, we produce follicle stimulating hormone. And I guess intuitively to its name, that is a hormone that stimulates the follicles. And when we talk about follicles, these are essentially would-be eggs. And so when you have enough of that hormone to stimulate the production of these, then what you're doing is you're saying, how can we mature as many of those eggs so that instead of a normal period where you release just one egg, or in the case of twins, two, you would actually be able to mature as many of those eggs as possible during this ovarian stimulation and egg retrieval process. And so then the egg retrieval process will require a transvaginal scan. So you'll have a probe put up the vagina, and then a needle will be threaded through this. Generally, you'll have mild sedation, and that needle will go through the vaginal wall, and each of the individual, under ultrasound, each of the individual oocytes or eggs will be aspirated. And so as they're taken up into it, and they're collected in a tube, and they're passed through to the embryologist, who look and count to see how many eggs are there. When the embryologist has them, they'll tend to do a number of washing steps, and then they put them in some cryoprotectants, and these cryoprotectants make sure that there's enough moisture is removed from those oocytes or eggs so that you don't get ice crystal formation in the eggs when they are frozen. And then quite literally, they're dunked in liquid nitrogen on a tiny little straw. And so we dunk them in liquid nitrogen, and they are kept there for further use should you need them. And so this is essentially a bit of a whistle-stop tour of the egg freezing pathway. And I think it's really important to actually listen to your body prior to this. So that's why I mentioned about being your healthiest self, acting as if this is, you're going towards the journey of an actual pregnancy. These are going to be your ice egg babies. Then listening to your menstrual cycle. So often we ignore symptoms related to menstrual dysfunction, and knowing in advance whether you're ovulating or not, whether you have healthy ovulation, whether or not your cycle is too long, too short, whether you're bleeding too much or too little, are really key indicators into your fertility generally. I think understanding what your ovarian reserve is just something that helps to guide you along the way on your journey, and make decisions based on that rather than guesswork. It's amazing to me that we have so many apps for finances, and we all know exactly what's in our bank accounts before we spend, and yet we're not taught at all to understand what our fertility is at. And it's something that I would say if you had £10 left in your account for the rest of the week, you would spend your money quite differently to if you had £1,000. You would prioritize. You would say, well, I need food for starters. And yet with our fertility, we just guess and leave it up to time and wait and see, and maybe we'll start trying. So I think assessing all of your options is really cool. So the science behind this is pretty amazing. I've been incredibly fortunate to do research into how we freeze eggs, how we study them, the different elements of oocyte health. And I think it's a very individual choice, but being armed with information about the process is one of the most fundamental things that you should do, not least of which because it is not necessarily an easy thing to go through. When we think that 90% of people who are infertile and go through a fertility journey experience depression, that's something you have to bear in mind as well. When you go through an egg freezing cycle, the major side effects, they're not massively major, but you should really take them into account in your day-to-day life. If you think you're going to be able to continue going to work, sure, you might be, but you're going to need to inject yourself. every day with hormones, you're going to experience a lot of bloating. You can have a bruised tummy. You may feel really, really emotional as a result of the hormones that you're getting. So I think being armed with information as you go into it, you put your armor on and you go through it. And actually, not everybody feels that way, but I think having information prior to going through it can be actually very liberating as well. So if you're curious, you can scan here, and we're going to get to some of the questions now. Lorraine, you've been very patient as I've gone through all of the different things, and I'm sure you're dying to talk about some things yourself. So I'm going to actually just stop sharing for now so we can have a chat and get to some of the questions. So earlier this year, Dr. Lorraine, you published a paper which looked at eggs that were frozen for a 10-year journey. Do you want to just explain a little bit about the results, or I guess the premise of that study?
Yeah, sure. So basically we had data. It's one of the largest data sets from the UK, and it's all taken from a single London fertility clinic. So we had about 383 women who have undergone the process of egg freezing for non-medical reasons. And what we found is that, like you said, the average age that women tend to undergo the procedure is 38 years old. And this is relatively consistent with all of the published literature, which kind of states it's between 37 and 38 years old. And we really looked at the outcomes in terms of how many people actually return to use the eggs that they've frozen. And this term is called the utilization rate. So, utilization of actually using the eggs that you've frozen. And generally, the utilization rate is still very small. So we found that less than 10% overall of the women actually then went back to use the eggs. And
within 10 years?
Yeah. And the average age at which they did that was around 42 to 43 years old. So on average, they were storing their eggs between 3.5 years, really. And again, if you look at other studies, it's very similar. Most people tend to just store their eggs only for about 2 to 3 years, and going back to them at around the age of 42, 43. And then what we found was it's really important the age at which you freeze your eggs. So of all the women who froze their eggs at the age of 40, those who then returned to use their eggs, none of them achieved a successful live birth. So this really kind of highlights the importance of the age at which you undergo the process of egg freezing. And one of the questions we always get asked is, what is the best age to freeze your eggs? And no one can ever give you a definitive answer. It's really difficult to pinpoint a particular age. But I think one of the important findings from our study is that we can say that definitely from 40 years and above, it's your chances of a successful live birth, which is what you ultimately want at the end, is pretty low. And although we have small numbers, I mean, with any data, you always have to consider like how many numbers you've got and whether you can generalize those findings. But again, if you look at other studies, we compared our data to, for example, the largest data set in Sweden and also in America, and they had very similar findings that women that froze their eggs at 40 had a live birth rate of 0%.
Wow. What, to me, it's harsh, right? It's really harsh that you would undergo that. But to me, I think we need to have more of a conversation with women about those facts. I would feel far better if somebody gave me truth and I hadn't spent multiple rounds. Because also when we talk about this, the price tag of egg freezing, what we also take into account is the fact that that's one round.
Yes, exactly.
That many clinics will recommend that you undergo multiple rounds of stimulation so that they can get as many eggs as possible. Some will offer packages whereby it's a minimum of 3 rounds of stimulation so that you are guaranteed enough eggs in order to lead to a live birth. And it sounds like a weird term when we talk about live birth, but this is a really clear distinction for the different terminology that is used when we talk about success rates. And success is something that is a heavily contested area, and it's something that everyone asks about. What are my chances? In other words, what will my success be? And traditionally, clinics used to publish their success rates. They would publish pregnancy success rates. And some clinics were actually publishing what were combined chemical pregnancy versus clinical pregnancy. So a chemical pregnancy is when you just wee on a stick. There's the presence of that, there's possibly the presence of something, but that very often doesn't lead to a baby. A clinical pregnancy is when you actually scan and you detect a fetal heartbeat. And so if you combine both of those things, you'll have a much higher success rate. And now clinics are bound by publishing only success rate as defined by number of babies born. But there's still also publishing rates that look at the number of babies born, but they don't actually mention how many rounds of stimulation that a woman has undergone. But that's really a really important caveat. What somebody's success or chances are, but also what are the things that we need to take into account for any individual's success. And so that's why we always want to move away from generalized statistics, because they can be actually quite damaging, because they lead you into a false sense of security when we talk about generalized statistics. And really it's more about understanding your individual risk and the individual things that can contribute to somebody having a reduced fertility or a higher fertility. So I'm going to answer a couple of questions here. Somebody has asked, does hormonal contraception stop the release of an egg if on for long term, over 10 years? Would that impact your ovarian reserve?
Yeah, so we know that contraception can suppress your AMH level, and they say it can suppress it by about 30%, but it's very dependent on the type of contraceptive that you're using. So I came across like one study when I was preparing for this, which basically said that if you're using the combined oral contraceptive pill, it can suppress your AMH by about 23%, compared to if you're using progesterone only pill, about 14%. And even with the Mirena coil, it's actually even less suppression of only 9%. Generally speaking, copper coils don't have an impact on your AMH levels. So we would always advise, if you wanted like a true reflection of your actual true AMH level, and you're thinking of conceiving, we would advise when you stop coming off your hormonal contraception, if you monitor your cycle regularity for at least 3 months, and repeat the AMH levels, then you may see not a dramatic increase in your AMH, but at least, sort of like 10 to 20%, it might go up.
Yeah, that's what we tend to see. And we tend to tell people to, if you don't know what your ovarian reserve is, if you don't know what your cycles are, if you've been on contraception for 10 years, everybody should take a break from contraception after that long. It's crazy to me that there are so many people who've been on contraception for so long and have no idea whether they have a regular cycle, no idea whether they have a normal period. And so that to me, I think is really critical to understanding. There are many people for whom, contraception is medical, and so they experience severe symptoms. And I think when put on hormonal contraception or contraception at a younger age for symptoms, whether it was weight, skin, heavy bleeding, they're much less likely to come off it, because they're afraid. At what point in your life are you going to say, okay, today's a good day to come off it and bring all that back into my life? But it also means that we're really in the dark about our fertility. So I do actually recommend people, and probably get lots of people pregnant as a result, people coming off hormonal contraception just to check in on their own body and understand where they're at, especially if they're looking to, go down a route of conception soon.
Yeah, I was going to add that like if they were doing it for that reason, then they would still need to use like condoms just in case they still do want to get pregnant.
Yeah, exactly. So there's somebody has said, I'm 39, I'll be 40 next June. Me and my boyfriend are not in a place to have a baby in the next 1.5 to 2 years. I have not frozen my eggs and wondered if I have to start a fertility MOT to understand if I have any eggs left to start with before even looking into freezing. Is it too late? And if not, where do I start? Thank you.
So I think it's like you said, we have statistics, but you always have to take the individual person. So in this situation, I think the best thing to do is to really try and find out where you're at the moment with your AMH levels. So we'd advocate trying the fertility test. You can start by checking your AMH level, and that will really give us the guide of, is it expected for your age range, or is it quite low for your age, or is it actually better than what we thought it would be for your age? And that really gives us the guidance of how much time we can then buy.
Yeah.
If it comes back particularly low, then that kind of is an encouragement that I need to do something now about my fertility. Whereas if it's higher than you thought, you might think, okay, I can, wait another couple of months before I kind of act on doing anything further.
I'm going to say something controversial, and that is, I don't think you should wait. I think if you're in a relationship, I think irrespective of your AMH level, I still think you should check. But I think freezing your eggs is a waste of money when you could just try and conceive. And that's probably not a popular opinion. Everyone wants to hear, a contained and measured approach. But the reality is we've seen so many people who just miss out on the opportunity to have children at all because they waited too long, because they weren't in the right place, because, their relationship wasn't quite where it should be. I don't think anyone's relationship is ever where it should be. But what also isn't where it should be is someone's fertility, and irrespective of your AMH, which I still think you should know and understand what your ovarian reserve is, the egg quality just does go down over time. And so giving yourself the best possible chance, I would just get at it tonight.
Yeah, and I would agree. I think obviously if you're in that situation and you can, in a position to just either check it or just get on and start having a family, that is ultimately the best option. But I guess if you're in that kind of bracket where you don't have a partner, or even financially, it's quite an expensive process to undergo. And if you just don't have that disposable outcome, then I think in the first instance, just knowing where you're at is the best way to start.
Yeah, I agree. There's somebody here who said, thanks for the info. I'm 33. Would this generally be a good age to freeze? Are your services in Ireland? Yes, they are. And can the blood test be done here and sent to the UK? Yes, it can. And there are also payment plans. You can pay upfront or you can pay in installments. Yes, you can. Somebody else has said, thank you for a great webinar. Thank you, Nadine. I'm 32 and plan to try and have a baby at 35 after finishing my postgrad studies. My AMH levels with you guys came back as high for my age. I'm a poor postgrad student. Should I still scrape some money together to freeze my eggs just in case still? I would just monitor. I think if you're planning on having a baby within the next 3 years, then there's no reason why you shouldn't monitor. Personally, within the team, we've had members who have had their AMH, actually some members of the team, and we, as I mentioned, we're our own internal clinical trial that we run, and every one of us test our ovarian reserve every month to see what the change is. And for some individuals within the team, the change has been dramatic. Within 1 year, it has fallen considerably. In fact, we have a number of fertility hatchlings from the Hertili-team for people who were like, oh, this is annoying, I can't wait, I'm just gonna crack on. And for others, they're like, no, I'm actually kind of steadily going down. So I think that is a very individual thing. It also, and what matters to that process as well is your lifestyle, what you're consuming, what you put into your body, your overall health. We cannot underplay enough the importance of our lifestyle and our diet and our consumption enough. I think as a generation of women are drinking far too much nowadays. We have data to back this up. So in our health assessment, we ask women, how much do you drink on an average week? And the second iteration of our test, we've actually extended that. We've doubled the rate of alcohol consumption because so many people were on the maximum. And when you ask people about whether they drink, whether they think they drink in excess, or they're moderate drinkers, or they don't drink that much, the amount of people who say, I am a moderate drinker, I only drink 1 glass of wine a night, and yet that actually is, biologically speaking, heavy drinking. We have kind of erased or reset the boundaries for what is healthy and what is not. And so we're actually misleading ourselves into thinking we might be healthy or not. So I think those things are things we can't miss out on as well when it comes to monitoring your own ovarian reserve. So I if I, as a poor undergrad, as somebody who spent my so much of my life as a poor postgrad as well, I would say it's better to monitor than to freeze your eggs, and maybe your circumstances will change by the time you're 35. Again, I'm not giving anyone advice other than maybe I am. Maybe I am. So here's one for you, Lorraine. Being on methotrexate for arthritis, I can't conceive whilst on it. Will this affect my egg quality?
That's an interesting question. I've not come across, I mean, the reason why we advocate not getting pregnant with methotrexate is because it can cause fetal abnormalities. So in particular, it kind of suppresses folic acid, so it can cause like problems with the spine and neurological development if you were to get pregnant with of the baby. But its effect on ovarian reserve, I haven't really come across as much. But if it's an immunosuppressant, I haven't really come across many studies that would look at immunosuppression on the ovarian reserve itself. I don't know if you know.
So I know that individuals who are undergoing egg freezing would come off methotrexate beforehand. In fact, I know people doing that right now. They've come off their methotrexate. They're sore, but they've done a 3-month washout prior to egg freezing, just to get that out of their system to give themselves the best possible chance. Yeah. But thank you for the question, and I think it's something that we should definitely follow up with some. We'll write a blog about that and follow up with some information so that we have some definitive facts.
Yeah.
We have another PCOS. I have PCOS, but regular menstrual cycle and no symptoms. I'm 40 though, and given the advice on age and combination of PCOS, what would be the best advice? I'm not on any contraceptive pills. I've just received a fertility test and will send my blood sample on my cycle. Congratulations on getting a test and taking the first step. I think you will only know the answer to that once you receive your results. It's a very personal thing, and perhaps having PCOS, it will look like a higher ovarian reserve or a higher AMH. Again, I think it's a very personal decision. It's really hard for us, and we put up a post on Instagram about the webinar, and we said, we put up about Rita Ora said she froze her eggs, and I immediately was like, well, she's not exactly a role model anyone can really equate to when it comes to freezing your eggs at 24. I definitely didn't have enough money or the wherewithal to do it when I was 24. And I actually don't advocate young people freezing their eggs at all. I think we need to move to a society where people understand their fertility. They don't disregard it and say, oh, this is something I can do anytime. I think we've gone through a real generation whereby things have just slipped by and we haven't actually given ourselves a fair stance at all. I think once you get your results, you'll be better. You'll be able to make a decision much better, and hopefully you can have an honest conversation about egg freezing and the chances. But most clinics will probably want to take your money.
I think with respect to sort of polycystic ovarian syndrome, a lot of people ask the question, can they even freeze their eggs because they have that condition? But the answer is yes. But you just have to be wary of the fact that because you naturally have a lot more of these egg sacs and these follicles, you're going to be more prone and have an increased risk of developing one of the complications of undergoing like controlled ovarian stimulation is ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome. So we categorize that in 3 stages. You can have mild, moderate, or severe. So only really 1% of people get moderate to severe hyperstimulation. So it's very kind of quite rare. But if you have polycystic ovarian syndrome, that risk of 1% can increase as much as to 10%. So it's just important to acknowledge that even before you undergo the procedure, you're probably going to be having very individualized stimulation protocols, and it will be specific to your age and your AMH level and your hormone levels. And it might be that during the process of when you're having the ovarian stimulation, you would be attending the clinic for regular blood tests and regular scans so that any protocols can be adjusted accordingly to prevent your risk of the ovarian stimulation.
Great, thank you, Lorraine. Somebody said, does it mean if I drink alcohol, my egg quality will be low? Lower.
So Again, with lifestyle factors, there's kind of like various different evidence. So the things we definitely know are going to reduce that rate of decline of your AMH are things like smoking. So smoking can cause ovarian aging, so you reduce the number of eggs and the quality of the eggs. Alcohol as well, like you say, we often fertility clinics will specify don't drink during that process of egg freezing, because it can really affect the quality and count of the eggs as well. And then you have other factors like exercise that can improve your overall reproductive outcome. And then there's other things like making sure that you're taking regular like nutrients and vitamins. So one of the vitamins that has been found, if it's quite low, if you're deficient, it can actually have, it's associated with very like low AMH levels, is vitamin D. So what we find is that in some clinics, as part of their routine workup of blood testing, they'll check your vitamin D levels, because it's such an important marker as well of like one of your nutrients to help overall outcomes.
Yeah, and I think there's sometimes we overemphasize and sometimes we don't emphasize enough the importance of our nutrients that we put into our body prior to that. And also, I think I keep hearing this in my head. I saw a post somewhere and it said, if your doctor prescribes you something without first asking about your lifestyle and your diet, they're a drug dealer, not a doctor. And it's obviously a very extreme statement to make. But when we know what we know about the impact of our lifestyle and the impact of all these things can affect our chances to conceive, it's part of what we built at Hertility was to say, wait a minute, not everyone should just go for IVF. If you're struggling to conceive, we want to know why. We don't want to just put you through an IVF cycle. We don't want to just put you through an egg freezing cycle. We want to know what are the things that could alter your fate. What are the things that you are doing that you could improve your chances and improve your fertility and improve, you can't improve your ovarian reserve, but you can improve your chances through proper nutrition, through understanding what your hormones are at, remembering that each of the hormones play, every individual hormone is like a musical instrument, and our whole endocrine system is like a band, and any one of them playing a bum note really messes up the song. And that is the best way for me of describing how our hormones really need to play the right tune in order for us to function and feel well. And just one of them not really functioning well, and this could be due to our diet, it could be due to exercise, activity, or stress. Stress is such has such a profound effect on our ability to even ovulate. The cortisol, even affects our ability to break down nutrients within our gut and our gut health. And all of these things play a vital role in this really beautiful synchronicity of our hormones and how we process things in our body and our menstrual cycle. So I think there are things that people feel that are out of their control when it comes to going down this journey, and there are things that you can actually do to optimize your fertility. So somebody has asked, would the Hertility test be able to show accurate AMH levels for someone with PCOS? Yes. Yeah. Yes. And actually, related to the question, somebody has said, was there any difference to the quality of the home test when compared to attending a consultant for initial fertility test? There is no difference to what we're measuring. This is something that when we do it like for like, in fact, the blood is sent to the exact same lab, processed in the exact same analyzer, the exact same result is given, except we do it at a fraction of the price. And clinics have obviously massive overheads. We've developed an at-home test whereby we use labs. Clinics have to pay rent, they have to pay consultants, they have to pay staff, they have to pay overheads for having a physical clinic. We're able to radically reduce the cost of that by having everything as a remote test. But it is what is far more comprehensive than what you'll get in a clinic, nobody shoot me, is the number of questions that we ask prior to doing that test. So we ask all of the different factors so that we can actually tailor the test to you. So rather than just testing everybody's AMH, we will test all of the things associated with what the symptoms you've said to us are. So for example, if you have triggered that you have the symptoms of PCOS, or indeed you tell us you have PCOS, we'll test your androgens, as well as your cycling hormones, as well as your ovarian reserve, as well as your thyroid hormones, to really give you a fully comprehensive picture. So in ways, actually, it's more comprehensive than what you're going to get, and far less expensive than the test you'll get at a fertility clinic. So there's a question here that asks, does egg quality translate to baby's health quality?
No. I mean, so egg quality is more like, what are your chances of having an embryo with aneuploidy? So as in with genetic abnormalities like Down syndrome or, those kind of things. But it doesn't equate to, in terms of healthy.
Well, I'd argue that we don't know. Because the eggs that are fertilized that lead to babies, nobody ever knew what quality they really were. And where the only exception to that is in IVF. And we know that poor quality or poor maternal health, especially preconception, does lead to poor outcomes. I tried to hold that one in. It does lead to poor outcomes in terms of health as well, or can lead to, and that they can be. I'm going to sneeze again. I'm sorry. And there can be generational effects, so that we know that the preconception period of our health, both maternal and paternal. So father actually managed to say that sentence while almost sneezing in my head. We know that both sperm health and maternal health or egg health really are important to contributing to a healthy pregnancy, full stop. And the reason I give the example of sperm is because we so often leave the sperm out of the equation. We say, like, whatever, that guy just shows up and gets somebody pregnant. But actually it contributes 50% of the DNA. And some studies have shown that in obese fathers who are in a diabetic state, they actually pass on that pre-diabetic state to their infants. And that though a cohort of obese men who underwent bariatric surgery who were able to reverse their diabetic state, then no longer passed on that pre-diabetic state to their offspring. So it kind of gives you an idea of the importance of paternal health and maternal health in the health of our gametes as well.
Yeah, I guess equally, like during pregnancy itself, you never know how your pregnancy is going to go. So you can develop like problems during the pregnancy, either with placenta or, things that might then also impact the health of the baby once it's born. Also during labor itself, not everyone has straightforward labor. There may be like risk of complications there. So I guess you can look at it from that side also.
Yeah. Somebody has asked, thank you for all the information so far. If you do choose to go down the path of eggs freezing, how do you choose a clinic? Do Hertility help recommend one? How long does it usually take between making contact with the clinic and commencing the process? So that's actually a great question. When we started Hertility, we wanted to have end-to-end service. So once somebody had the results, we wanted to be able to say to them, here's what you need to do. So we partnered with clinics that we recommended. So yes, if you go down the process with Hertility, once you receive your results, you can immediately book in for a consultation at one of our recommended clinics. And we are really picky about clinics. So we wanted to make sure if you're curious about a clinic, an amazing place for information about clinic quality and success is on the HFEA website. That's the Human Fertilization and Embryology Authority. And that's the governing body that resides over all use, storage, procurement of gametes, so sperm or eggs. And so it's the governing body over all fertility clinics. And so we only partner with highly rated fertility clinics. So please do reach out. We can give you a fertility advisor call, or you can book in with our wonderful Dr. Lorraine, who'll tell you all about the process, and we can book you in within that week to speak to somebody. And then depending on your health and whether you're on contraception, whether you need to come off it for a while, that process can start pretty much immediately, actually, and can last for maybe 2 to 3 weeks.
Yeah, I think it's quite important to research the different clinics as well, because it's important to remember they'll each have their own prices. Although the HFEA kind of put their average prices, it will vary between clinics. And some of the clinics also report their success outcomes as well. So it might be of your interest to look at that as well when you're deciding which clinic you want to go for.
Yeah, absolutely. But we'll definitely help you with that. And we have a great clinic that we can refer you to, depending on your location, of course. Oh my goodness me, it's actually 9:07 and I completely lost track of time. We started a little bit later. So I'm going to wrap up so that I'm sure you've had a really long day. I'm trying to scan between the questions, which is why I wasn't looking at the time so much. I want to thank you, Dr. Lorraine, for joining us this evening, for sharing information about your research. To me, it really illuminates vital information that we need to know. And in ways, I think it's an honest conversation that we should be having with ourselves and with women in and around whether or not you should spend the money on freezing your eggs, if it's especially at a certain age, and when the success rates are low above a certain age, the conversation should be, maybe you could think about getting a sperm donor, doing solar motherhood. We're going to do another webinar on solar motherhood, where we'll bring in a mum who did just that, which I think is an incredibly profound story and not one that we hear enough about. Thank you to everyone who joined us. This session has been recorded and it will be emailed afterwards. We are a female-founded company who are determined to revolutionize the way we view fertility, women's health, reproductive health, and anyone that you can spread the word about Hertility to and just educate them. We'd really appreciate that. So thank you for your support in joining us this evening. And thank you, Dr. Lorraine, for all your expertise.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.